usually perceived as being motivated either by any actual or perceived characteristic. This is just some of them, right? Race, color, religion, ancestry, national origin, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, or mental, physical, or sensory disability, or, and this is where it's the catch-all, by any other possible distinguishing characteristic. So be cognizant of you. Board of Educations have typically policy on certain issues, and then for some of those issues, they have what's called a regulation. Right? Regulation is usually a really long document that's like super detailed, whereas the policy is often an overview. There are some policies that don't have regulations. I share all of this only to say that previously we had a policy and a regulation on transgender students that was created several years ago. That's being revised, and as of next week, we'll have just a policy. It's about 7 pages, 8 pages. I think it's critically important that you know what's in there. And so I'm going to go over the most important pieces here so that we as educators are all on the same page with regard to board policy, which is driven by state and federal law. Some of this might surprise you or might be new to you, but I wouldn't want you to be caught off guard not knowing what's in the policy based on the law. So, as uncomfortable as it might be, right, there's this piece here in red. It's recommended that school personnel discuss with the student the terminology and pronoun each student has chosen. I'm not suggesting that anybody go up to someone, this would be a really bad decision, and go, hey, you look like you might be transgender. Would you prefer she or he? That's not what I'm suggesting at all. What I'm suggesting is, if the opportunity is there and the student brings it up, or if you're made aware because a counselor or a SAC says, you know, this student identifies as a male, and that student wants you to know, try to find the comfort in having the conversation about it, because it's going to make that student feel more comfortable. All right, I want to give you a brief story of something that happened a couple of weeks ago because I think it's relevant. All right, Teresa, I don't know if Teresa's still here, but she would tell you, she's kind of witnessed it firsthand. Last year when we had students from our GSA presenting our cohorts on LGBTQ training topics, all right, the student that presented in my group, who I had spent a lot of time with all year on No Place for Hate projects, helped with other things, just really a leader, right? I had no idea this student that I thought was a girl, because was born biologically a girl, identified as a male. And were some of you, raise your hand if you were my cohort last year. And do you remember when I said she, and the student said, I go by pronouns he, him. And I was just like, oh, thank you for telling me, right? And so fast forward to this year, I've gotten to know the student even better, is involved in so many good things in our school. The student was brought down to have a conversation with Dr. Greger about some equity initiatives as part of a group of about 10 kids, right? That in the room looked like 10 females. Right? I know this student is a male, right? I'm getting somewhere with the stories, so stay with me. In the conversation, in my awkwardness of saying, so, you're all brought down here because you were recommended. We had gotten recommendations from Issa, and I think Lindsay and Heather and a couple of other staff that are involved with some kids that could make these recommendations. And I said, man, how about this group? I guess no boys were recommended for this.
Well, you were right.
So I go in my office and I go, oh my God, what the hell did I just do? But it was, I can't even put into words how awkward the moment was because I go, I guess no boys were in this group. As I look at this student that told me last year I identify as a male, and I go, I'm sorry. Well, that happened. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I went in my office and I felt like crap, and I go, God, I certainly didn't do it on purpose. But I pulled the student afterwards and I said, I just want to say I'm so sorry about what happened. And I did not mean to upset you. I didn't mean to out you in front of that group. I'm really sorry. The student knows, he says to me, it's okay. You pulling me in to tell me that you felt that way is all that matters. So I say this because we can walk on eggshells and we can worry about it. And as I sat in my office, like almost in tears, like, oh my God, this kid's going to hate me, or I'm going to get fired, or I knew that the conversation in that moment is what matters. So as difficult as it might be. Just consider that. In this policy, which is about 7 or 8 pages long, there are a lot of definitions in there, all right, a lot of recommendations. I will share it out with you once it's formally approved. Much of it is already in our current policy, but I just wanted to point out a couple of things. The student-centered approach. This is critically important. Critically important. If a student says to you, yes, I was born a female, but I identify as a male, don't tell my parents. Don't tell the parents. Don't tell the parents. Don't tell the parents. Don't tell the parents. They have the right to keep that, whether we think it's in their best interest or not. Have a conversation with another colleague, whether it's an administrator, a counselor at SAC. Right? We had a student this summer that was in a lot of dialogue with me and with Heather. And we might recommend you really should consider telling your parents, because it's something they might find out in the awkward moment. But we're not required by law, nor are we permitted to violate that student's wishes for their parents not to know. Raise your hand if you knew that. I'm guessing you probably didn't know that. I think that's an important piece to share. Nor is there what used to be thought to be a requirement that a birth certificate is changed. Absolutely. No, if a student wants their name changed, for example, in Power School, right, and there's a conversation, and administration is, do we have enough information to go on? That happens. Right? If a student wants a male name on the ID badge when the female name is in Power School, we're required to work with that. That's crazy. So just be cognizant of all of that.
That's crazy.
And again, we can make a million mistakes, and that's okay. I call the student by wrong pronoun, and I know the student pretty well. So we have to do our best to be, to pay respect to the wishes that they state with regard to pronouns. Okay, so did you know that if a student was born a female, and in that policy it talks about ASAD as an acronym, assigned at birth. The student was assigned the female gender at birth, that's what it says in the policy, but identifies as a male. That student needs to be permitted to go into the male restrooms. If that student chooses, that student needs to be permitted to go into the male locker room if that student chooses. That's the law. We created several years ago unisex bathrooms, and I don't know whether you know about this, so let me make it clear. Outside of the 9-10 cafeterias, there's a single bathroom. It used to have she's bothered me because I work in an office with all women in the counseling office, but it had a women's. I was like, I can't use that bathroom? It used to be women's. Women's faculty would go in there, right? I would battle Judy over to get in there. That can be used by, it's important that you know that. And the same can be said for upstairs in the court. There's also a unisex bathroom that is typical. We would certainly allow students to use that. Nurse's office is another safe place if the student wants. And this is whether the student's transgender or just wants a private bathroom. You don't need to be transgender to be permitted to use a private bathroom. All right? So this just talks a little bit about participation in activities at school, and so facilities. And I already mentioned this: restroom, locker room, changing facility that corresponds with the student's gender identity. They must be permitted. Transgenders, right? This is where the conversation of that is. Lean on a counselor, lean on an administrator. We feel like we need to help you with this. That's all I have for that. Now,
is student against member, against faculty members. Because I think a lot of people are not aware of what happens if there's a HIB violation or accusation against a staff member. Sure. And the other thing I wanted to ask about the transgender thing, how about, since the law is as it is, a male identifying as a female actually participating in a female sport? That now is part of the package, correct?
Correct. Whether the public agrees with it or not, it is part of the law that would permit that. So, Jerry, I'm glad you asked. So, just to be clear, a student can be found, I'll say guilty because I can't find a quicker word, can be found guilty of a HIB on another student. A staff member can be charged with a hib on a student. Whether we like it or not, a student can't be charged with a hib on a staff member. I don't even know that I necessarily agree with that, right? Because some students are just like completely out of control. I'll finish. Let me finish. I don't. But the point is, they are disrespectful to you in a way that might be a hib if you were a student. They're going to be held accountable. But what you're asking, Jerry, this is important. I have had to get involved in some hib investigations on staff members. It's important that you understand that staff members you can be, whether you're a teacher, a support staff member, anyone that's employed, a coach, you can be held accountable for a hib violation against a student. I only say it because Jerry asked me to say it, but I'm glad that you did. I don't want you to live in fear of kids. I just want you to understand that if a parent comes forward and says, I think that Mr. So-and-so is bullying my kid in math class, we are required to do the investigation. And I was involved in several last year that were not his. I was involved in some that I wanted to say, this is completely ridiculous, but we're not allowed. So in those times when we have to go down that road, know that we are required. We don't have the authority to just say, yeah, but I don't think the teacher did it, or I don't think the teacher meant it, or I think this kid's getting control, or I think this parent's apply too much, or whatever. We're required. Is there anything else I should add to that, Jerry?
Just that there's also legislation out there in regard to filing a false hib as well. So if it is found that a student, for example, files a false hib against a staff member, that comes under the statutes as well.
And that would be a good thing, for that to be something that they could be held accountable for, that false accusation, sure.
Now, if there's a hib filed against a staff member, is the process an automatic administrative leave?
No.
Automatic administrative leave?
No.
Under what criteria would there be an administrative leave assigned?
I think that would depend on the severity of the allegations. Because keep in mind, sometimes the leave is authorized by the superintendent. Really, I don't have the authority to authorize that. Obviously, without him being in support, sometimes it is to protect the staff member. Not because there's a belief automatically that there's guilt, but sometimes it's that barrier to protect. Did I answer that question? Any other questions about HIP? Go back, because I don't think I stopped for HIP. Transgender policy.
Oh, does the transgender policy also apply to staff?
Yes. Yep. In regard to facilities, and yes, if the staff member identified as transgender, would they be permitted to use the restroom of the gender that they identify with? The answer would be unequivocally yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think that Angela's question is, should we, maybe I didn't hammer this home, so let me just add to it. The safe space, being able to change, as an example, in a locker room where you're comfortable, that is really regardless of your gender identity, right? So if a kid is just socially awkward and they communicate to a phys ed teacher, or another teacher, a nurse, a counselor, I really don't want to get changed in the locker room in front of other kids. It's incumbent upon the staff member or us as a team to work with that kid to try and help them find an alternative that makes the most sense for them, right? We don't want to do is say, you're fine, just go to the nurse's office and change there. So they have to, whether we like it or not, whether it's efficient enough or not, they have to have some sense. So it might be more like this. Well, you're not comfortable changing in the locker room. Have you thought about a place where you might be comfortable? And they might say, the nurse's office. Then you say, okay, let me communicate with the nurse. I'm sure we can work something out. Terry, I see you back there, Kathleen. I'm sure we have a number of kids that for a variety of reasons use your restroom regularly, your restroom to change, right? And they're not all transgender, right? Some are, yeah. So I guess the key is the communication piece. Then that's where you would say, okay, well, let's get you to your counselor, or here maybe some things. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about maybe changing the nurse's room or something? Prompted with suggestions. Any other questions about that? This next part will be pretty. I want to stress a couple of things because I'm pretty proud of the work that we have done. All right, I will say that I have to give credit to a lot of the folks at the middle level that did some of the legwork to bring the high school code of conduct and the middle school code of conduct